Miguel Faria and his father escaped communist Cuba, and among other things, he became an author and professor of neurosurgery in the United States. I'm Randall Savage, and this is Close Up. And joining us today is Dr. Miguel Faria. Welcome to Close Up.
I'm happy to be here.
And you are an author. You are a retired professor of neurosurgery, and you're associate editor-in-chief of Surgical Neurology International.
Yes.
So you still stay busy in your retirement?
I stay very busy with medical journalism. Mm-hmm. Yes, and I enjoy it. I'm also very much interested in history, and I also have many articles published in real clear history. So between medical journalism and history, I'm pretty, and my garden, I'm very well occupied.
Your garden?
Garden,
like
yes.
Like a home garden?
Yeah.
You grow things, huh?
Yeah.
What's your favorite plant there?
Tomatoes.
Tomatoes?
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, as you mentioned, you write a lot of articles.
Yes.
And one that attracted my attention recently was you wrote a thing about the possibility of a convention of states. And as you know, the Georgia Senate and Georgia House of Representatives have both approved their personal versions of having a convention of states. You've expressed concerns over this and whether it would do more harm than good. First of all, what exactly is a convention of states?
The Convention of States is one of the two methods that our founding fathers placed in the Constitution under Article 5 of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. There are two methods for amending the Constitution. The first method has been used many times. In fact, it has been used 27 times. The first 10 times gave us the Bill of Rights. Mm-hmm. And for example, he has changed the way the president and the vice president are elected. That's one of the things that happened, and that was a good thing. But it has also given us things and amendments that I don't necessarily agree with. For example, in 1919, we passed the 18th Amendment prohibition that took 14 years for us to get rid of that amendment until the 21st Amendment was passed in 1933. But for 14 years, we created organized crime. Americans became disrespectful of the law because we made that mistake. We also passed the 16th Amendment, for example, in 1913, that brought us the graduated income tax. Well, that is in one of the planks of the Communist Manifesto. I think that was a great mistake. It passed because the American people were told that only the rich and the famous, the upper 5% of income earners, will be the ones that will pay that income tax. So it was passed. It's now part of the law of the land. The 17th Amendment is, to me, is another mistake in which the U.S. senators, instead of being appointed by the state legislatures, they are now popularly elected by the people. And that sounds good. The problem is the states were left without representation. And the very delicate balance that the founding fathers have placed in between the powers of the federal government and the state governments have been compromised. Now, why do I mention all these problems? Because those were one specific problem, the graduated income tax, mm-hmm. the election of senator. But with the second method, with the Convention of States, we could have even bigger problems because we can end up converting from a innocent-sounding Convention of States to a constitutional convention and end up with a completely different constitution.
Can they do that? Can they come up with the idea of a convention of states with some specific things to do, and then once they get there, they can do whatever they want?
Well, the problem is we don't have a precedent. It has never been done before in our history. The only time that it's ever been done was in 1787 And at that time, we ended up with a completely new constitution. And even the way that happened is interesting. In 1786, James Madison was part of the Convention of Annapolis, in which the Articles of Confederation were going to be modified as to improve interstate commerce. The Founding Fathers were very much interested in increasing commerce in the Ohio Valley area to the Atlantic. Mm-hmm. And they felt that this was very important. Very few people attended. Therefore, James Madison, who already had discussed this with George Washington, that the Articles of Confederation were inefficient. Perhaps we can change this. So they called for another convention to take place the year after that, in 1787 in Philadelphia. And instead of amending the Articles of Confederation, in that convention of states, we had a constitutional convention that completely overturned the Articles of Confederation. Well, at that time, I think it was a good thing. We have a statesman like James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and a miracle took place. I don't know that another miracle can happen.
You're thinking it might be, instead of a miracle, a possible disaster?
I think it could be a catastrophic disaster, because the political climate today has been polarized to such an extent that, well, we always think, well, you know, the southern states, we want some of these things, for example, more freedom, more power to the state government, as in the amendment, in the 9th Amendment and the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. Let's enforce those amendments. But some people in other states, for example, Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Delaware, they don't want that. They want a more powerful federal government. They don't mind restricting individual freedom. So when you get all of these states together with such disparate views, we don't know what's going to come out of that brew that we're, you know, that we're putting in the fire. So there's a possibility that some good could come of it, but I do believe there is a greater possibility that we may end up with something much worse than what we have. You know, in December of 2013, just a couple of months ago, there was a convention, an assembly at Mount Vernon. 100 legislators got together to discuss the formation of a constitutional convention.
Let's hold that thought. We'll take a short break and be right back with Dr. Faria. Close-up, and I guess today is Dr. Miguel Faria. Prior to the break, we were talking about a group of legislators back in December convening at Mount Vernon to talk about a convention of states. Yes,
they got together and they decided that they will plan this convention once all the states have signed up for it, what will take place. Well, it's interesting the reasons they gave, and for example, I have a note here. They are fed up with the federal government overreach, that a convention will meet for the purpose of crafting constitutional amendments to curb the federal government's abuses. Amendments that are being mentioned include congressional term limits, as well as limits on federal taxation and spending. I wanted to read it so that it came from the horse's mouth. So, I mean, I am in sympathy with those goals. I think the government is overreached. I think we're no longer following the Constitution. Nevertheless, I don't think the problem is with the U.S. Constitution. I think the problem is with us, the American people, and the people we're electing, both to the House, to the Senate, and to the presidency. And furthermore, the presidents have been appointing Supreme Court justices, not all of them, some of them, who have not really forced the government to stay within its constitutional limits. The welfare clause has been abused. The interstate commerce clause has been abused.
How so?
Well, basically, many members of the Democratic Party, including former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, she believed that the welfare clause gives the government the right to do anything under the general welfare. In other words, we're going to increase taxes because it's good for the general welfare. We're going to lower the minimum wage because that is part of the general welfare. And that is not what the Founding Fathers wrote in the preamble to the Constitution. What they meant by general welfare was the general well-being of the states, that the federal government will create a climate of well-being so that the states could function. This is discussed very thoroughly by James Madison in the Federalist Paper number 41, incidentally. And to do that, the Constitution, in Article 1 of the Constitution, gives the Congress powers. These powers are specific, enumerated powers. The federal government only has those powers specifically delegated to it. For example, Article 5 gives congressional powers. Mm-hmm. Article 2, the executive. What are the prerogatives of the president and the executive branch of government? Article 3 is the judiciary, and they have specific enumerations.
And you're thinking that what is happening is that the federal government has kind of gotten away from that, and it's causing a lot of the problems that some of these people who want a convention of states see, but they could be corrected without that, without any?
I believe the problems that we have today can be corrected without a constitutional convention. And I say constitutional convention fearing the worst. Let me read you the 9th and 10th Amendment that have been forgotten. I told myself I was going to read them because these are two amendments that are forgotten, but they do underscore the limitations of the federal government, mm-hmm. and how we have been electing people that who have been violating their oath of office. The Ninth Amendment reads, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights should not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. In other words, we have rights that are not even enumerated because the rights of the individual are everywhere. Mm-hmm. But the federal government has only enumerated rights. Those rights that are not specifically mentioned, the federal government does not have. For example, we have Department of Education, we have Obamacare, health care. There is no powers delegated to the federal government to immerse itself in education or health care or even crime and law enforcement. Those are areas that belong to the states. Here is the Amendment 10. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So the powers that are not enumerated specifically for the federal governments belong to the states unless the states are prohibited from having those powers. So all the powers that are left over belong to the states or to the people. Health care should be part of the states. Education should be only the states. Law enforcement should be for crime, should be for the states. In other words, and now we have the Alcohol Tobacco and Firearm, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearm, which has also almost become a rogue agency. Fast and Furious, this is operations that should not have taken place by the Constitution. These are powers that a standing army was anathema to the Founding Fathers. And the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearm has become just a rogue agency with out of control. And those are powers that should belong to the states. And because of this, many Tea Party members, many conservatives want to have a convention of states to redefine those limits of government. And I think the aims are commendable, but I think the potential pitfalls are so serious that I have this strong reservations that I have mentioned.
The Convention of States, it don't come about automatic. You have to have a certain number of states, I believe, in order to do that. How many have to approve it?
I should have told you about that. The two methods, let me go through the two methods. The first method is the one that we have used 27 times.
Through the Congress.
And that begins through Congress.
Mm-hmm.
The initiative comes from the U.S. Congress. 2/3 of both houses, of the Senate and the House of Representatives, have to agree on an amendment. That once that amendment is passed by both houses of Congress by 2/3 majority, then it goes to the state for ratification. It takes 3/4 of the states to ratify an amendment. Therefore, it takes 38 states to ratify by the first method.
Okay, we'll pick up the second method right after this break. Back with close up, and our guest today is Dr. Miguel Faria. In prior to the break, you just talked about the first method of changing the Constitution, constitutional amendments, and the second method. Tell us about it.
Okay, the second method is the one that I'm afraid of. That's the Convention of States, and it goes like this: the states meet and convene a convention. Once 2/3 of the states approve an amendment, this is theoretical because it has never taken place. Mm-hmm. Once 2/3 of the states approve a measure, then it goes back to all of the states for ratification. So first you need 34 states to agree, and then during the ratification process, the convention, which could become a constitutional convention, is ratified by 38 of the states. It takes 38 states, three-quarters of the states. Mm-hmm. The problem is that it has never happened before, and there is disagreement between law professors and constitutionalists as to whether a convention of states can be limited to one subject. For example, they have been called for convention of states or for balanced budget amendment. Mm-hmm. They have been called for term limits, and many states have signed up for these things. But this time, it's an undefined convention of states. As I read you before, the Mount Vernon Assembly mentioned 3 things: runaway government, balanced budget amendment, and too much taxation. They want to correct those 3 areas.
The runaway government, that's a pretty vague term. What would all that include?
Well, for example, I will imagine that it will include tightening up the welfare clause, put it in the proper perspective, redefine it, for example, mm-hmm. So that the government cannot do whatever it likes because the welfare clause. In other words, go back to what James Madison said in paper number 41, and not only him, Thomas Jefferson was very adamant about the definition of the general welfare. Even Alexander Hamilton, who was probably one of the most brilliant Federalists of the Founding Fathers, knew that the welfare clause did not mean for the government to do whatever it pleases. So I have quotation from them stating that the welfare clause is subject to the enumeration of specific powers by the federal government in the first 3 articles of the Constitution. And that is what they are talking about, runaway government. The Congress is doing whatever it likes under those terms. They cite the welfare clause or the interstate commerce clause. That's one. Balanced budget, well, they want a balanced budget. Again, in Article 1, there is a definition about lawful collection of taxes and appropriations. I think it's understood to me that the government should have a balanced budget. The third thing is taxation. Oh my God. You know, the Soviet Union used to be a totalitarian state, and the wall came tumbling down, just like Ronald Reagan said, in 1989 in Germany. 1991, a new country developed in Russia, the Russian Federation. They have a 13% flat tax. 13% flat tax. We have, via the 16th Amendment, a graduated income tax where the wealthier and most productive members of our society are shouldering the vast majority of the taxes. Some people are paying over 40% of federal taxes, income tax. Incredible. And that's not counting all the state taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, and so forth. 51% of the American people now pay 95% of the taxes. 40% of the American people pay no federal taxes. You know, we have a problem. That's what the Assembly in Mount Vernon wants to correct. I think that is, again, a very dangerous way to try to correct this. There are people in the Obama administration who are concerned with income inequality. On the other extreme, they want to take us back to the time of the Soviet Union, because trying to correct income inequality in a free society will mean the establishment of socialism or communism. I mean, I hate to put it that way, but somehow this is a wake-up call to state the obvious.
And throughout the years, you have been a pretty much, well, not a pretty much, a very vocal statement about people having a right to bear arms. Would the Second Amendment, would that be something you'd be concerned about in the Articles of Convention of States?
Very much so. The Second Amendment, there is a professor already in Texas that I've heard her speak, and this is one of the targets, if there is a Convention of States, that the Second Amendment should be limited. And that despite what the Supreme Court has said in 2 rulings, in the McDonald decision and the were 2 decisions in which the right to keep and bear arms is an individual right. This professor says that that is not true, and that is one amendment to the Constitution that needs to be repealed or altered because it's no longer, it's antiquated, it's outmoded. It's an embarrassing thing to do, to have in our Constitution, because most industrialized nations don't have. They don't allow the civilians to own firearms. So it is a very scary proposition. That's one of the amendments that can be altered to become meaningless. I'm also concerned, believe it or not, on the First Amendment. The Obama administration has already, in conjunction with the Federal Communications Commission, wants to have audits of what local stations, what talk show hosts are saying. Hey, political speech is the reason that we have freedom of the press in the Constitution. Well, I couldn't be surprised if some states, like from Massachusetts or Vermont or Delaware, Rhode Island, may think that, you know, some of these talk show hosts, their speech is too offensive to me and to other people. Let's limit this, you know, speech, because hateful speech, there is all kind of excuses that can be used to limit freedom of speech. That's another.
The FCC has kind of backed off of that, haven't they?
Well, it goes back and forth. It goes back and forth. You have heard the Fair and Balancing Act that's come up before. So another amendment is the Fourth Amendment. I'm extremely concerned about the Fourth Amendment, which says that we need a warrant for certain seizures. Well, in this age of terrorism, unhappily, many Americans want security at the expense of their freedom, and they will go along with on wiretapping of telephone conversations.
We're out of time. I wish we had a little bit more time to talk a little bit more about that, but we appreciate you coming by. It's always good talking to you. I'm Randall Savage. I'll see you next time on Cross Up.